जी हाँ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਦੇਖ ਰਹੇ ਹੋ ਅੱਜ ਕੱਲ ਅਮਰੀਕਾ ਸਾਂਝੀ ਸੋਚ ਟੀਵੀ ਤੇ ਮੈਂ ਇੰਦਰਜੀਤ ਕਾਲੀਰਾਏ ਸਾਂਝੀ ਸੋਚ ਟੀਵੀ ਔਰ ਅੱਜ ਕੱਲ ਅਮਰੀਕਾ ਤੇ ਆਪਣੀ ਗੱਲਬਾਤ ਚੱਲ ਰਹੀ ਹੈ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਅਮਰੀਕਾ ਦੇ ਇਲੈਕਸ਼ਨ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਹਿੱਸੇਦਾਰ ਹੈਗੇ ਨੇ ਨਵੰਬਰ ਨੂੰ ਇਲੈਕਸ਼ਨ ਆ ਰਹੀ ਹੈ ਪ੍ਰੈਜ਼ੀਡੈਂਟ ਦੀ ਕਾਂਗਰਸ ਦੀ ਸੈਨੇਟ ਦੀ ਔਰ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਲੋਕਲ ਅਸੈਂਬਲੀਜ਼ ਹੈਗੇ ਨੇ ਔਰ ਸਿਟੀ ਕਾਉਂਟੀ ਸੁਪਰਵਾਈਜ਼ਰ ਸਿਟੀ ਕਾਉਂਸਲਮੈਨ ਇਹ ਵੀ ਇਲੈਕਸ਼ਨ ਆ ਰਹੇ ਨੇ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਹਿੱਸਾ ਪਾ ਰਹੇ ਨੇ ਕੈਂਡੀਡੇਟਸ ਹੈਗੇ ਨੇ ਆਪਣੀ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਗੱਲ ਚੱਲ ਰਹੀ ਹੈ ਉਹ ਕੈਂਡੀਡੇਟਸ ਦੇ ਪਿੱਛੇ ਮੈਨੇਜਮੈਂਟ ਕਮੇਟੀ ਹੁੰਦੀ ਹੈ ਕਮੇਟੀ ਫੰਡ ਰੇਜ਼ਿੰਗ ਕਰਦੇ ਨੇ ਔਰ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੀ ਸਪੋਰਟ ਕਰਦੇ ਨੇ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਜਿਹੜੀਆਂ ਪਿੱਛੇ ਹਿੱਸੇਦਾਰ ਹੁੰਦੇ ਨੇ ਸਪੋਰਟਰ ਕਹਿ ਲਓ ਚਾਹੇ ਐਡਵਾਈਜ਼ਰ ਕਹਿ ਲਓ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚੋਂ ਜੋਰਜ ਯੰਗ ਆਪਣੇ ਨਾਲ ਜੁੜੇ ਹੈਗੇ ਨੇ ਇਹ ਥੋੜੀ ਦੇਰ ਪਹਿਲੇ ਕੈਲੀਫੋਰਨੀਆ ਸਟੇਟ ਐਜੂਕੇਸ਼ਨ ਬੋਰਡ ਦੇ ਵੀ ਇਲੈਕਸ਼ਨ ਚ ਸੀਗੇ ਹੁਣ ਇਹ ਐਡਵਾਈਜ਼ਰ ਹੈਗੇ ਨੇ ਕੈਲੀਫੋਰਨੀਆ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਰਿਪਬਲਿਕਨ ਪਾਰਟੀ ਲਈ ਕਈ ਕੈਂਡੀਡੇਟ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਕਾਂਗਰਸ ਲਈ ਖੜ ਰਹੇ ਨੇ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਇਹ ਸਪੈਸ਼ਲ ਐਡਵਾਈਜ਼ਰ ਹੈਗੇ ਨੇ ਅੱਜ ਮਿਲਦੇ ਆ ਜੋਰਜ ਯੰਗ ਨਾਲ George, welcome to Ajkal America. We have talked when you were a candidate for school superintendent a few years back, but now I believe that you have a much different and a more integrated role in the politics of America. You're a special advisor to quite a few congressional candidates. So first, let's have an introduction to George, the advisor to the Republican congressional candidates.
Hello, everybody. And yes, I've been recruiting. I mean, actually, I talked to India, tried to get you to run for office. I think you are very qualified. Maybe the timing is not this time. But anyway, I have been recruiting candidates. Some of those are for like offices like local county supervisors, mayors, and also at the same time, which is my focus this year, is congressional candidates, people that are running for the U.S. Congress, because looking in the world, we have a lot of issues that needs solutions, and that's where I'm putting my focus on right now.
I appreciate that, and let me thank you for trying to recruit me a few months back. And after my personal analysis, I don't believe as a retired state worker, I wanted to work so hard and have a whip thrown about by you to make me work hard. So anyway, enough on that. I enjoy what I'm doing. And this is one of the avenues that we can get candidates and people like yourself to share ideas with the community at large.
Right.
You mentioned that you're trying to work with candidates and you're trying to recruit the local and the federal congressional level. There are a few issues that impact us nationally. They impact us at the state level. But sticking with Congress, the recent decisions that have come down, both from the administration and very recently from the Supreme Court, I'd like since you ran for school superintendent in California, this issue is relevant to that topic of education. It's relevant to our kids going to school, K through 12 and college. Title IX had an amendment from the administration that was going to expand the definition of equal opportunity, equal rights, which currently exist between the male and female genders. Many of us in this society, in this community, believe or scientifically try to demonstrate that there's more than two genders. I don't want to go into that topic, but the administration tried to expand it, the Title IX, to do something that the Olympics created, or not created, but showed us was a challenge. We had two transgender individuals who participated in the women's boxing tournament. They got the silver and the gold medals. Very talented, capable boxing individuals, participants. Many will argue were had their abilities stolen from them. A medal that could have gone to a biological female went to somebody who could be classified as non-biologically male. Title IX would have expanded that to our schools and colleges. As a previous candidate for school superintendent in the state of California, I would ask your input on that. But before we talk on that, I believe the Supreme Court came out over the last couple of days and stopped that. So 4-5, the Supreme Court said no to the amendment that was coming to Title IX. As somebody who has a key interest in education, can you tell us where, had you been school superintendent, where would you have stood on that in California?
I am working with one of the congressional candidates, and she is a mother of a high school girl who is in the wrestling team. Wrestling is a very intimate sport, kind of like boxing you just mentioned earlier, but even more so. Now, if we allow people that are biologically male to compete against girls in a sport, let's say wrestling, that's going to destroy women's sports. You are not going to have women having a fair competition against biological men in those arenas. Now, you can go online and see some of those very egregious examples of boys and girls wrestling on a state-sanctioned match. That's completely unacceptable. Now, if somebody who's transgender wants to try something on sports, they are free to form their own league. They can have their own transgender league where they can compete with people with similar biological profiles. So that's something that we need to do, but there are more to that. With what the Democrats are doing is that they are not really teaching the skill sets that's going to help our kids succeed. They're talking about gender theory here and there. We are having second graders thinking about what gender they are. In the meantime, countries like Singapore or China is doing very well educationally in engineering and math and even in AI. So we need to go back to teaching something that will really help our kids become the successful kids that they need to be in the next generation. Successful adults.
I appreciate that. And just on that note, I believe there's a study in Europe which talks about this gender fluidity, and it questions the European approach compared to the American approach. While the American, at large, I'll say, the American community or the American political elite are pushing this infiltration of gender into women's sports. My personal question is, on the political arena, these people are coming out and saying they stand for women's rights. They want to defend the woman's right to choose. They want to defend equal opportunity for women. How can that be relevant when you are infecting the sport that our children take part in by gender division? We have boys basketball, we have girls basketball, we have girls wrestling, we have girls boxing, we have field hockey and all these other games, even athletics, running, jumping, triple jump. The argument has been brought by many people where it's the biological composition of these individuals, you and I, compared to our other significance. Because of this difference, not getting into theology, how can the other side, you're on the Republican side, how can your opponents justify women's rights, their stance for women's rights, when this is happening to women's sports? Why are they not protecting the women's right to compete in sports uninfected? And the other category I'm going to give you, we had a Supreme Court justice nominated by this administration. When asked the question about a woman, that individual herself, a biological female, said she does not know because she's not a biologist. Do you have to be a biologist, PhD professor to define what a woman is?
It's just so crazy right now. And you said earlier, Indy. So right now it's a 5-4 decision, something that should have been common sense, should have been a 9-0 decision. It's a 5-4 decision. and that's why the election is very important. Obviously, I'm looking for the for candidates that are running for Congress, not for U.S. Senate. But obviously, if the Supreme Court is appointed by the nominated by the president and then confirmed by the U.S. Senate, so we need to have very sensible people that are both in the White House and in the U.S. Senate to make sure all this craziness does not happen next time. Because now it's 5-4. What if it becomes 5-4 the other way around? Does that mean that biological men can now compete in what we just mentioned, like wrestling or basketball or boxing? So this is much closer than we would like it to be, and that's why we need to fight. And I will say, paraphrase Ronald Reagan, a lot of our Democratic friends, is not that they're ignorant, it is that they know so much things that's not even correct. So we have seen this congressional hearing where one of the this lady said, "Oh, we don't need to have specific category for tennis for women," and she claimed that Serena Williams can beat the best man in the world. Whereas Serena Williams herself, she said it herself, that if I am competing with men, I will be at rank about 500 in the world, not the first. Now, she's a great athlete. She deserves her own stage to be the best women's tennis star in the world. But if we destroy the distinction between the genders, then she will be, she said it herself, she would not compete against somebody that's ranked 200th among the men's side. So that's the facts. And yet the Democrats who are testifying in Congress say that's not the fact. The liberals cannot choose their own facts. They have to accept certain immutable facts, and unfortunately many of the Democrats are not even accepting those facts.
Thank you for that. And I'm just going to add to what you said about Serena Williams. Caitlyn Jenner, who used to be Bruce Jenner, has been an extremely successful and a very competitive athlete in his days as a runner, as an athlete. He has gone through this gender transformation. And as Caitlyn Jenner, which is the current identity and what we know as Caitlyn Jenner, she has come out and says she does not agree with this. She does not agree with biological males taking part in female sports. But let's close this topic and let's move on to other stuff. You are concentrating on congressional candidates, and some of these congressional candidates will be members, once they're successful in November, of the Congress coming up in 2025. This may have a significant effect on Congress for the next 2 years after. Leaving the White House out of this picture for now, if the current majority of Congress is made larger for the Speaker of the House right now, he is able to get votes which are not borderline. How do you think our impact will be changed on the world arena? Specifically, two factors that are influencing our world right now, which we need to have an influence in, is Ukraine and the Middle East. We have a lot of division within the country on whether we support Israel or whether we support the Palestinians, what happens with Gaza, Hamas, and Hezbollah, and all this other stuff. We all as a nation, mostly as a group of the world, will agree that terrorism is not what we want. Coming to Israel, we're coming to a one-year anniversary of October 7th. That was not a fight that Israel picked. It was a fight that was brought to it.
One of the things I remember is that in 2008,
how do you think the new Congress will impact those two should the Speaker Johnson end up with a fairly significant margin?
Yes, I also remember in 2008 the terrorists from Pakistan attacked Mumbai and killed a lot of people, innocent people, in that attack that are just going about their own businesses. Now, what happened in October 7th? It's even more egregious. Thousands of innocent people and babies are being murdered. So we support Israel's fight to eradicate terrorism. Now, on the bigger stage, which is something that I really worry about, is what's going on between Russia and Ukraine. Now, I think Putin was make a huge mistake when he invaded Ukraine. But right now we have a situation where we are doing what we can to try to destabilize the entire Russian country. And I think that's a very, very risky thing. Now, we talk about terrorism. We talk about Gaza. Gaza have about the total Palestinian, about 4 million people living in Gaza and the West Bank. Look at the Central Asian countries. There are 70 million people living in that area. And if Russia was destabilized, if Russia is to be destabilized by the current trajectory of things going, those countries can be radicalized by the Taliban. So I'm hoping, even before this election is over, we're really hoping to have a peace deal in between Ukraine and Russia. And I think on this front, I've been working on this for 2 years, where I'm really hoping that the government in India can step in to do this, because let me explain. Number one, this is not India's fault. I don't think India need to do this or should do this, but India can, and India is the only country that have the credibility and the gravitas to do this. India is the only major country in the world that both sides still can trust. They cannot trust China, they cannot trust even Switzerland, but they can trust India. And secondly, let's say the Central Asian countries, if they become destabilized, India will be the first victim of those terrorism. So I am really hoping that as soon as possible, India can step forward and offer to mediate a peace between Ukraine and Russia and get the temperature dialed down, so to speak. Because as we want to, some people want to punish Russia for what they did to Ukraine, we need to understand that we do not want to destabilize that country any further. Look at what happened in Iraq. I would say nobody here likes Saddam Hussein. But after the Saddam Hussein government was toppled, we have 10 years of chaos. So now who's in charge of Iraq? Right now is the Iranians in charge of Iraq. Now imagine the same thing for Russia. If Russia was destabilized and the Central Asian countries are controlled by either Iran or the Taliban or the Chinese communist government from Beijing or Turkey, none of those outcomes are going to be good for the world or good for the United States. Now, as members of Congress, we can use the funding, because right now the war is being funded by billions of dollars from the United States. We need to use that leverage to end the war as quickly as possible by saying that, look, nobody's going to get everything they want. We need to be mindful of the historical fact that Crimea and Luhansk and Donetsk has been Russia for a long time. They are transferred to Ukraine during the Soviet times for administrative reasons. Now, we could, with India as the mediator, as the trusted mediator, to say, look, let's end the war, have a ceasefire, and let people come home when they want to, whether it's Crimea or Luhansk or Kiev, and then wait another 10 years, they have a referendum, and then decide whether or not they want to be part of Russia or part of Ukraine, and that way we can end that war. Now, the reason that I bring from Gaza, I bring it all the way to Russia, is that right now we are pushing Putin to do a lot of dangerous things. We have basically made it clear by the NATO or by the United States government right now that we are not willing to negotiate with Putin to end the war. We want him to be out. But Russia is in control by Putin right now, and he doesn't want to go. He is not going to go voluntarily. And that's why he is creating chaos elsewhere so that we have to talk to him. The root of many of the conflicts, I have to say this, I guess when the Hamas attacked Israel, they must have talked to their handlers in Iran, and those people might have spoken to the people in Russia. So we need to have a peace everywhere. And unfortunately, the Biden government, by the way, I have said this over and over again. When Trump is president, when Trump was president, we have 4 years of peace. Not only that, President Trump was able to help Israel with strong peace treaties with Oman, with the Sudan, with the UAE, and he's making peace deals. We have 4 years of peace under Trump, and now with Biden in charge, we have war in Ukraine, war in the Sudan, war in Burma or Myanmar, which is right next to India as well, and now we have war in Gaza. Because of the weakness that we show in Washington D.C., we're not having war everywhere. So with Congress, like I said, we need to use our leverage to say that we must create a condition. I'm going to repeat this again. We must create a condition where peace is possible. It's up to Russia and Ukraine to make peace, but we as America, we need to create a condition. We cannot keep sending money with no strings attached. We need to stop sending the message that we want Putin now. We have to create a condition where peace is possible. And that's what I advise all my the candidate that I'm helping to run for Congress to do. I believe India should be the 6th permanent member on the UN, and that will be basically the world's thanks. If India can step up and mediate this peace, I think the world should stand together and give India the 6th permanent seat on the UN Security Council, which it so deserves.
George, just carrying on from where we were, we've discussed the issue of Title IX, education, sports. We've covered a bit of the world scenario as far as Middle East and Ukraine. You've submitted proposals, suggestions for a hopeful possible peace that we all desire. But moving on to the other things, you mentioned congressional representatives. The House of Representatives actually has the purse strings. So right. Regardless of who occupies the White House, the occupancy of the congressional house is critical to how our money gets spent. And yes. They also key components of what we've had being discussed in the campaign recently. Back a few weeks back, President 45 Trump proposed in Las Vegas no taxes on tips. A few weeks later, his opposite to be nominated this week also came up and said no taxes on tips. Regardless of the fact that they both want the same thing, another factor comes in. It doesn't matter what they promise. Congress has to pass it. So right. You're working to get or maintain Speaker Johnson's majority in the House. What economic benefits can we achieve if we have a House that wants to limit spending? Could we actually get a balanced budget? Because I don't believe we've had one in the last 2 decades. So what would it take for Congress and the congressional representatives forward to come up with a budget that is balanced, that protects the education, protects the seniors, protects the veterans, and limits the benefits to non-Americans from taxpayer money?
Well, yes, indeed. And the other day, Donald Trump had a very good interview with Elon Musk. And they have discussed even Elon Musk's offer to come in and help streamline the federal government to reduce spending. Now, I was speaking earlier when you're talking that the last time we have a balanced budget is the year 2000. That's before the 2001 war on terror. So what we need to do on the congressional level is to create a balanced budget amendment. Now, we cannot cold turkey. We can't get to balanced budget next year. But what we need to do is to set a time target, which is to reduce the percentage of deficit spending by 5%. Right now it's at about 40%. So we can go from 40 to 35 to 30 every 2 years until we get to about 5% deficit spending, which I think is a reasonable limit to have. Now, how to do that is that we, every time, this does not require a constitutional amendment, which is a very lengthy process. What Congress could pass a law to say is that as every time, every budget that does not meet that requirement, member of Congress will reduce their salaries. Again, the Congress can set their own salaries. They can say that as long as we do not meet the reduced deficit timeline on a year-to-year basis, the salary of congressional members will be the minimum wage. By the way, this idea is not my idea. The ideas come from Warren Buffett. Warren Buffett basically says that if we tie budgets, deficit budget to the pay of congressmen or congresswomen, we're going to have a balanced budget very quickly. So what my congressional candidates are doing, by the way, including Chris Bish, who's running against Ami Bera in the Sacramento area, and that is, we have created this new law in Congress which will say that here is our target to reduce the federal deficit from right now at 40% down to about 5% of the total budget. And if we don't meet that, we as member of Congress will reduce our pay to minimum wage. That is going to make this happen, like Warren Buffett said many times, and say, if we have this link between effectiveness in getting a balanced budget to how much member of Congress get paid, we're going to have a balanced budget tomorrow. Now, I'm not that optimistic, but I think it's doable.
I totally acknowledge your proposal. I'm going to bring up something that is not counter, but is reflective. Congressional representatives, many of them, go into congressional, senate, political life earning the average American salary. There's a few members of Congress who are teachers. There are a few members of Congress who came in from other professions, even the medical field. Our Senator Rand is an optician. So some of these people, and including Ami Bera, they have had a career where their salaries have been significant. And many of them would appear to have taken a pay cut to go to Congress. That's not where I'm going. Many of these members of Congress went in with a bank balance, of a personal bank balance, which may be a few $100,000. And then they have millions writing books, doing speeches, and all this other stuff. While we may have rules and laws in place of non-conflict or behavior or going to places and talking and getting compensated, they still end up with a war chest in their political funds, and they end up with a significant personal cash. Leaving that aside, my personal opinion is it doesn't matter if they do what Donald Trump did and work for zero salary or give their salary away to charity as Donald did for the 4 years he was there. We have another candidate running for office who was saying he was not going to take a salary while he's in Congress. These people may say that, but the end result is we have another component in our political system, and that is the lobbyists. And they have means of funding these people. So while I take your proposal and I semi-agree with it, I would add a component that we need to tie the hands of the lobbyists in terms of what they can do, how they can do. In many ways, the state of California was leading that by limiting what they can do for state employees, for state representatives, in terms of what funds they can give in regards. Leaving that aside, we've covered a bit of the economics of the balanced budget. We've covered some foreign relations. How about what we may do for those who serve in uniform, those who've served in uniform, our veterans? One of the issues of the current homeless crisis in the US is our veterans. We attribute that to PTSD. We attribute to that a lot of post-service syndromes, we can call it whatever. But these veterans who sacrificed giving their all, some of them gave their all. Some of them have come back wounded. Some of them have come back wounded, not physically, but mentally. What can a future Congress, regards a balanced budget, in the terms of the candidates that you're talking to, working with, what could we expect them to do to service those who serviced their lives for the country? They served in uniform. They're now walking the streets without benefits. They're not getting treated the way we promised they would be. What can we do to give them an assurance that they will be taken care of for all that they have done? The other side, those serving in uniform, they need not only to be compensated so they can live and not have to apply for food stamps, but also be protected security-wise and have the technologies and the weapons they need to be part of the force that they want to be, the best in the world.
Well, two things. First of all, I want to acknowledge your great idea about tying the lobbyist pay to my proposal as well. I will definitely add that to the proposal that I'm putting forward, and that's why, by the way, you're a great candidate indeed. So that's number one. Go back to the veteran situation. We are spending so much money on Ukraine and to feeding the people that are in this country illegally. With those money, we should be able to help veterans find housing. So there are many needs for veterans. First of all, we talk about mental health and physical health. While Trump was president, he fixed the VA, the Veteran Administration medical system, so to reduce wait time for people that are seeking treatment. I think we need to keep making improvements on that front. So veterans who need to seek help for physical injuries as well as mental issues, there will be sufficient resources to help serve them. And that's something that we already have a system for, but we need to have sufficient funding to make sure those services are adequate to the needs of the veterans. Now, the second thing we talk about housing. Now, Kamala Harris has come up with a plan which is to give $25,000 for people to buy houses. Now, I would have a better plan on that. For example, we are in places like Stockton or Oakland or even Los Angeles. We have a lot of abandoned houses within the urban core. Now, we need to work with churches, work with other nonprofits and city government and county government to help rehabilitate those housing and make them available to veterans so that they can go back and become part of the community again and stay where they grow up, or they can have jobs and opportunity and have housing at the same time. So the proposal by the Harris team is going to be very beneficial to a couple of big developers, whereas my plan is going to utilize and revitalize small community organizations, churches, synagogues, temples, to be a part of the solution and help fix some of the properties in Oakland or Stockton or LA where may have been run down or derelict or decrepit, and fix it for homeless service members so that they now have a place they can call home.
I like the idea, but I have a challenge for you. This was tried in Sacramento. There was a derelict hotel, abandoned in many ways, and there was a proposal, we won't name the politicians, that they wanted to bring that in, renovate it, rehabilitate it, and bring it in for housing for the homeless and those in need. I can go buy a house today in Sacramento for about 400. It may not be that great. It may not be a house I want, but it's a house that's available for 400. I can renovate that, put a few $1,000s into it, make it into a nice house. But most of the property in Sacramento that's available for 400, 500 is fairly good and is in nice neighborhoods. However, this proposal a few years back to rehabilitate this abandoned hotel, it was going to cost, I believe, $600,000 to fix each unit. If you can buy a house for $600,000, why would you want to spend $600,000 per unit on a hotel? So I like your idea, but there needs to be a method of auditing, a control system where the spending are not a waste of taxpayers' money. We need the solution. I like your idea. And that idea is not too different from what we had in England. England rebuilt after the Second World War. They provided housing. They did it exactly how you're suggesting. Many of my friends, when I was growing up in England, lived in what was known as council housing. Later in time, the authorities, the city councils, the county councils, the government sold those houses to those individuals at reasonable market price, anybody who wanted to buy it. But the housing was built by the government. It was rented out at reasonable, subsidized housing for those who needed it. We know it can be done. We may have to have Lego type buildings, but we need to be competitive with the real world. If a friend of mine in the Central Valley who's in construction, who's in renovating properties, you might even know him, but we're not going to bring his name up. He can go and buy a house, tear it down, and build it and sell it for $400,000. Why would the government spend $600,000 on a dilapidated hotel where the shell is already there? You're not rebuilding it. And many of my friends who own hotels, they don't pay $600 for a hotel room when they buy the building. So I agree with you. Another issue I would do is put in financial controls. But George, I have to interrupt both of our conversations. We're going to have to carry on. We'll have to do another session. And I apologize for that. But
I definitely want to say that. I don't want to go to do it.
Is I'm going to ask you to share your details of people who can reach out to you and what they may discuss with you. And we'll plan on another session because our topics may be few, but the actual solutions and the discussion is not. So I thank you for your time now. Share your details.
Thank you.
And we'll plan another session.
Thank you very much, Indy.
ਤੁਸੀਂ ਦੇਖ ਰਹੇ ਸੀ ਅੱਜ ਕੱਲ ਅਮਰੀਕਾ ਸਾਂਝੀ ਸੋਚ ਟੀਵੀ ਤੇ ਜੋਰਜ ਯੈਂਗ ਜੋ ਐਡਵਾਈਜ਼ਰ ਹੈਗੇ ਨੇ ਕਾਫੀ ਕੰਗਰੈਸ਼ਨਲ ਕੈਂਡੀਡੇਟਸ ਦੇ ਲਈ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਆਪਣੀ ਗੱਲਬਾਤ ਹੋਈ ਸੀ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਖਿਆਲ ਆਪਾਂ ਸਾਂਝੇ ਕੀਤੇ ਨੇ ਇੱਕ ਹੋਰ ਵਿਚਾਰ ਨਹੀਂ ਹੈ ਇੱਕ ਹੋਰ ਜੋਰਜ ਯੈਂਗ ਦੀ ਲਾਈਫ ਦਾ ਹਿੱਸਾ ਸੀ ਇਹਨੇ ਮੈਨੂੰ ਵੀ ਅਪਰੋਚ ਕੀਤਾ ਸੀ ਕੈਲੀਫੋਰਨੀਆ ਸਟੇਟ ਸੈਨੇਟ ਦੇ ਇਲੈਕਸ਼ਨ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਹਿੱਸਾ ਪਾਉਣ ਲਈ ਮੈਂ ਇਹਨੂੰ ਜਵਾਬ ਦੇ ਦਿੱਤਾ ਸੀ ਵੀ ਮੈਂ ਇਸ ਹਿੱਸੇ ਤੋਂ ਪਾਸੇ ਠੀਕ ਹੈ ਕਰਕੇ ਮੈਨੂੰ ਆਪਣੇ ਖਿਆਲਾਤ ਸਾਂਝੇ ਕਰਨੇ ਲਈ ਇੰਡੀਪੈਂਡੈਂਸ ਚਾਹੀਦੀ ਹੈ ਜੇ ਚਾਹੇ ਕੋਈ ਡੈਮੋਕ੍ਰੇਟ ਹੈ ਚਾਹੇ ਕੋਈ ਰਿਪਬਲਿਕਨ ਹੈ ਔਰ ਇੰਡੀਪੈਂਡੈਂਟ ਹੋਵੇ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਵਿਚਾਰ ਸਾਂਝੇ ਕਰਨੇ ਲਈ ਮੈਨੂੰ ਇੰਡੀਪੈਂਡੈਂਟ ਔਰ ਆਪਣੇ ਅੱਜ ਕੱਲ੍ਹ ਅਮਰੀਕਾ ਲਈ ਇੰਡੀਪੈਂਡੈਂਸ ਚਾਹੀਦੀ ਹੈ ਸੋ ਇਜਾਜ਼ਤ ਦੇਵੋ ਮਿਲਦੇ ਅਗਲੀ ਵਾਰੀ ਅੱਜ ਕੱਲ੍ਹ ਅਮਰੀਕਾ ਸਾਂਝੀ ਸੋਚ ਟੀਵੀ ਤੇ ਮੈਂ ਇੰਦਰਜੀਤ ਕਾਲੀਰਾਏ ਦੇਵੋ ਇਜਾਜ਼ਤ